Yeah, everything that's, the books are all for free distribution, so anything that looks interesting after the talk's finished, then people are very, very welcome to help yourselves. There's some older ones and some ones hot from the presses as well. So I'll begin in our traditional way, paying respects to the Lord Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasāmi. Well, the theme that was suggested for this evening by Chris John, who I was corresponding with to arrange to come to this Buddhist Society Summer School, was about Metta and Karuna, compassion and loving kindness, and the comparisons and contrasts between those two, so confluences and contrasts. So I'll try to explore that area a little bit. It's very prescient of Desmond to talk about emotion and that domain, because it's very much, I would say, connected with these two qualities and their role as part of the Brahma viharas, or the sublime abidings, the four divine states. So first of all, perhaps to just describe what I would understand as metta, loving kindness, loving friendliness, heartfulness sometimes it's called. It's a benevolence, a well-wishing, and combined with that a quality of acceptance. So I would say that's a definition for metta, and it's particularly directed towards, say, in appreciation of all the different external qualities of living beings. So, and mind states as well. So, painful, pleasant, neutral, near or far, inside or outside, beautiful or ugly, wholesome or unwholesome. Whatever living being there might be, whatever mind state there might be, then the quality of metta is a mixture of both friendliness towards those beings, those states, and their whatever quality, whatever characteristic they might display, and also a quality of acceptance, an appreciation of how everything belongs. So I would say that's a simple way of characterizing metta, or loving kindness. Now I'll go into definitions a little bit more in a little more detail later on. Though, so in a way, metta is like a broad, sublime attitude that is in relationship to all beings and to the external qualities of all beings. And then karuna is a kind of subset, in a way. It's relating to the beings or states of mind that are painful. So our word compassion relates to that appreciation or the receptivity towards the painful states of being in other entities outside, or compassion for those painful states of our own mind, our own heart. So that that's a specific focus of karuna, is towards painful feeling, pain and suffering, both in the outer world and in the inner world. Then to speak a little bit about the other two of the four sublime states, Brahma viharas. Then mudita, the third one, is to do with success and good fortune and blessing. So it's to do with relating to the happiness and and the good fortune, the success of other beings. So it's called sympathetic joy, joy at the good fortune of others. And so the way I like to characterize this is, and Desmond having mentioned, we had a lot of company on the road coming here, a lot of time sitting still on the various roads we were traveling on. My trusty driver David bringing me here. Mudita is the experience when your light goes red and the other person's goes green, you feel happy for them. So it's a rare quality in the world. Or when you're trying to find, again, it's speaking about vehicles, you're trying to find a parking space and you're just making your way around the car park, and then you feel happy for the person who's just found the last space available. Oh, I'm so happy they got a spot. Well, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. You have to go and find another car park. So mudita is that joy at the good fortune of others. And then upekkha, the fourth one, sometimes translated as equanimity, again relating to the tone of a quality of emotion. In English, the term equanimity can seem a bit flat, bland, kind of also translatable as indifference. But I think it's important to remember that the Brahma viharas, they are great brightnesses of the heart, abundant, exalted, immeasurable. They're vast brightnesses of the heart. And so equanimity doesn't, in the English word, doesn't really carry a great brightness to it, or that kind of emotional tone. So often Ajahn Sumedho has translated upekkha as serenity, and I feel that's a more helpful rendering of the word. And so there's a little, I didn't bring any copies today, but there's a little booklet of mine called Serenity is the Final Word, which is a lot about upekkha, equanimity, in various different aspects of it. So the one way of relating to these four as a collection, I like to think of, you can fit, if you can make use of graphic images. So one way of figuring it is if you have metta as a single point, and you make a sine wave from that. So then the mind relating to painful states, using the downward movement for painful, is karuna and compassion, and then rising up to the top of the peak on the sine wave, which is happiness, good fortune of others, and then back down to upekkha on the sort of the home baseline. So it's like a sine wave that goes in a distinct form like that. And one of the reasons I like to think of it that way is that I like to consider that upekkha, serenity, is in a way the ripening of loving kindness. That loving kindness ripens or finds its completion in serenity. Again, this is not a sort of Buddhist belief or diktat. I don't sort of require you to see things in that way, but I found that a helpful way of understanding the relationship that between metta and upekkha, loving kindness and serenity, and then also the connection between compassion and sympathetic joy. That the karuna is to do with those painful states, and mudita is to do with the positive or bright states of success and pleasure. Again, those of you who have a graphic imagination, if you turn a sine wave through 90 degrees, it looks like a circle. Maybe that's tricky to understand. I should have a whiteboard here. But if you start off with metta, then you go down into the karuna for the painful states, up into the top for the mudita, the positive states, and then back to the starting spot. If you look at it from end on, so you have again the metta ripening in upekkha, or the completion or the fulfillment of loving kindness is in that quality of serenity. And to me, it's also interesting how, just as a side note on serenity, upekkha, is that it's in the Pali Canon, in the Theravada teachings, it's the fourth of the four Brahma viharas, it's the seventh of the seven factors of enlightenment, it's the 10th of the 10 paramitas. So that's why I call that little booklet "Serenity is the Final Word," because it is the last one on the list, and in most of the Buddha's lists, of which we have many in the Pali Canon, as I'm sure many of you realize, that it usually goes from the coarsest at the beginning to the most refined at the end. And so that in this we start off with metta, may all beings be happy, may I be happy, may I be well, and it ripens in a quality of upekkha, or serenity, a sense of complete evenness of heart amidst the turbulence of all things. So, I would say, mentioning turbulence, where metta is an all-encompassing attitude towards the external features of all beings and all mind states. Again, this is just a suggestion, but the way I like to look at it is that upekkha is more relating to the inner quality, and particularly the quality of change, uncertainty, vibration, agitation. So serenity is the heart's response to turbulence, to agitation, to uncertainty, to the kind of that aspect of the world which is in motion and in a state of activity. So it's that space in the heart which it can be completely still, the center of the cyclone, that quality of stillness in the presence of great agitation, great movement, great turbulence. So, to talk about the Brahma viharas generally, talking about emotion, one of the ways of understanding all four together is that these are the emotions of the enlightened mind. So if the heart is completely free of greed, hatred and delusion, if a being is totally enlightened, then these are the emotional states that will naturally arise. So that in response to different situations, different aspects, different patterns of experience, then loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and serenity will arise. So, and in this respect, it's nothing forced or calculated. It's just a natural responsivity. It's just like if the wind blows from the east and the leaves move to the if the wind comes from the east, the leaves will move towards the west. If the wind comes from the west, the leaves will move towards the east. It's a natural response towards to conditions. So I would say that when an enlightened being, they are responding with joy or with kindness or with coolness or serenity, with compassion, according to what they're meeting, what they're knowing, what's being felt and seen. So I would say this is the four Brahma viharas are describing the emotional qualities of a totally enlightened being. Like the Buddha is often described as being supremely kind or supremely compassionate, serene, and also joyful. So that in that respect, those four qualities are what arises when the heart is free of greed, hatred, and delusion. They arise on their own. Another aspect is that we talk about the practice of loving kindness, the practice of compassion, or developing these qualities in a deliberate and intended way. And so there's many different kinds of guided meditation and practice that are crafted to bring those qualities into being. Particularly compassion in the northern Buddhist world, and loving kindness, a big speciality in the southern Buddhist world. So with these particular practices, like metta bhavana, loving kindness meditation, or the different kinds of compassion practice in the northern Buddhist world, like the recitation of the great compassion mantra, or the great compassion repentance ceremonies and so on, I'm familiar with in the Chinese tradition, or figures like Chenrezig in the Tibetan Buddhism, or Kannon in Japanese Buddhism, that these are specific, intended, deliberate practices, but by putting the heart, or guiding the heart, training the heart to be picking up those qualities and strengthening them, clarifying them, then that in turn leads back or leads into the enlightened heart, the quality of Bodhi itself. So I like to think of it as two-way traffic. Again, it's a bit of a graphic image. So the enlightened mind functions in terms of the four Brahma viharas. The four Brahma viharas, when they're practiced, then they lead into the realization of the enlightened mind. That because by in a sense imitating or embodying deliberately that quality, then it evokes where that quality in nature comes from. And a similar example that I like to quote very often is about the 8 precepts in a particular sutta, which is, and I did look this up, so don't be too impressed. Sutta number 70 in the Book of the Threes, in the numerical discourses, the Book of the Threes, sutta number 70, And the Buddha talks about the formulation of the observance for the moon days, the 4 moon days each month, the full moon, new moon, and the 2 half moons. And the way he formulates what we call the 8 precepts that are practiced in the southern Buddhist world on the moon days, lay people take those on as particular practices. In that sutta, the Buddha is describing how he formulated that mode of training for the lay community. And what he says is that all their lives, from an enlightened being, from the time of their enlightenment till their final passing away, they never deliberately take the life of another living being. So if members of the lay community, if they practice this on the moon days, then, quote unquote, they will be living as the arahants do, and that will be for their long-lasting welfare and happiness. And so you're deliberately adopting the behavior of an arahant. And so not taking life, not stealing, celibacy, not lying, not using intoxicants, and then the last 3 are not eating outside of the morning time, not using amusement, decoration, entertainment, beautification and adornment, and the last one is not having an over-luxurious sleeping place. So for some of you, those 8 precepts will be very familiar, others of you not so much, but to just keep it brief, because I realize the clock is ticking. That's that whole principle of the Buddha saying, so if you just if you refrain from lying, if you practice celibacy for the day, if you are avoiding distraction through alcohol and drugs, if you are not seeking entertainment or beautification, distraction through the senses, then, quote unquote, you will be living as the arahants do, and that'll be for your long-lasting welfare and happiness. So, by practicing loving kindness and compassion, you are living as the arahants do, and then that's also, I would say, in exactly the same way for our long-lasting welfare and happiness. And they're called the Brahma viharas, the sublime abidings. That vihara is literally a building, like a living place. So Bihar in India is called Bihar because it's where there were lots of viharas, So there's probably a few Indian speakers here, Indian language speakers. So Bihar comes from vihara. There was lots of monasteries in Bihar, so that's the name of the state. So it's just a dwelling place. So Brahma means pure or divine, sublime. So it's a divine living place is for the heart to embody, loving kindness and compassion, sympathetic joy, serenity. So again, I like that model of two-way traffic, and again, that is something just to contemplate. Don't say this is sort of rigid Buddhist doctrine that you're expected to believe from the Pali Canon, but rather to Ajahn Amaro's way of talking and reflecting on things. So it's just offered for consideration, but I feel it's a helpful model to indicate how these things work in practice. So in some more detail, loving kindness. Again, Desmond was talking about when Ajahn Sumedho came here in the 1970s, and there was a great deal of interest in his teaching and the forest tradition practice. And when he came, there was a sort of standard form for loving kindness meditation, when you would bring to mind the phrases ahang sukhito homi, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering, or may all beings be happy, sabe sata sukhita hontu, may all beings be happy. And so he simply, when giving guided meditation on loving kindness or talking about it, he just automatically started using those phrases and those kind of types of meditation guidance. And maybe some of you were even there at the time. It was 1977, 78, so it was 46, 47, 48 years ago. But what he discovered quite quickly is people would say, Ajahn Sumedho, that's so sentimental. It makes it just nauseating. It's just, may I be happy. Ugh. It's ghastly. It's like a kind of Walt Disney Buddhism. And I'm kind of over exaggerating a little bit, but probably not that much. So he took note. Ajahn Sumedho is an extremely reflective and adaptive teacher. So he took note of that. Oh, when you say "May I be happy," or "May all beings be happy," in this country and in this culture, that's taken as being over sentimental, like thinking pink. Yeah. And he saw, and it has this very negative effect. And not just in Britain, it's also in the USA. I lived in America for a long time. I didn't actually see the announcement for the event, but I heard that there was a day-long meditation that had the title, "I Hate Metta." Exactly for this kind of reason, like, it just brings up... everything was fine until we did that. And I had that experience myself, leading 10-day retreats, and people would say, everything was fine until we had that Metta day, Ajahn. Turned me right off. So, being a very adaptive and creative teacher, then Ajahn Sumedho decided, okay, let's change the languaging. He sort of reflected, well, what are we talking about here? What is the heart of this quality? And so instead of "May all beings be happy," or I love everything, or "I love everybody," that he changed the language to "not dwelling in aversion," and then people could relate to that. Yes, I can do that. I can, rather than reading it as trying to think pink or just overlay everything with a sentimentality of superficial well-wishing. People quite honestly and directly, sincerely could, I can not dwell in aversion, I can not hate. And he began to see that what was happening was that people were mistaking acceptance for approval. And that there was another part of it, and that when people were asked to be friendly towards things, it was being understood that they're expected to like everything, or like everyone, or like every being, or like every aspect of themselves. And that felt superficial, or false, or unrealistic. And so he began to change the language. And rather than trying to like, metta doesn't mean trying to like everything, but rather it's drawing upon that capacity that we have in our heart to be kind to every being, every aspect of our own nature, the high, the low, the weak, the strong, the medium, the internal, the external, the coarse and the fine, the wholesome and the unwholesome. We can be kind. We don't have to try and make ourselves like the unlikable. So that, over the years, has been a very, very become a familiar theme of his. I feel it's extremely skillful, because when the languaging is, may all beings be happy, it can be mistaken as I'm supposed to like everything. A 3-day migraine, or noisy neighbours who are bringing lawsuits against you. I'm so happy, they're giving me many opportunities to practice. That we can tell ourselves that, but what we're feeling is not so positive. But we can make friends with our resentment for the difficult neighbours, or we can have kindness towards our impatience with a 3-day headache, and so on and so forth. So in terms of the inner qualities, inner qualities of metta, I feel that those are some themes that's helpful to reflect upon. That loving kindness doesn't mean trying to like everything, and accepting everything doesn't mean approving of everything. It's saying, here it is, whether it's wholesome or unwholesome, beautiful or ugly, whether it's noble or ignoble, here it is, and it feels this way. So this isn't to say that there isn't some kind of outgoing or expressive quality of metta, but I feel that that's the attribute of acceptance is really the heart of metta. So in this way I like to talk about it in terms of comparing it to the breath. So breathing, as we all know, there's an in-breath and an out-breath. And so both aspects are an intrinsic and an essential part of the breathing process. So I would say that the real heart of metta, the essence of metta, is that quality of acceptance, open-heartedness. Here it is. This is the way things are in this moment. Beautiful, ugly, near or far, internal, external. this being, all beings, here they are, and they are like this. So that quality of acceptance, I would say, is like the in-breath. It's the receptive aspect of metta. And the out-breath is the expressive. May all beings be happy, or may I wish well, or I'm trying to cultivate that quality of benevolence, of kindness towards all beings, all mental states. And so, just as with the breath, I would say the key part of the breath is getting the oxygen into the body, because the oxygen is what keeps us alive. It vitalizes the body. And the out-breath is letting go of the extra, the carbon dioxide. I would say in some ways that the essence, or the core, the heart of metta is that quality of acceptance, and then the expression, or the expressive, the outgoing quality is a sort of secondary response. And that more important in our training, in our practice, is to discover that quality of open-heartedness, to have loving kindness towards the pains in your legs, to your difficult neighbors, your own feelings of inadequacy in terms of meditation or family life, and so on and so forth. And so, in this respect, that quality of acceptance is brought to what the presently arisen state is. Again, one of the difficulties with idealizing metta, or trying to, or taking it to be a kind of overlay, is like, I shouldn't feel angry towards my neighbors, I should have loving kindness towards them, I should be happy for the fact that they can afford to bring continual lawsuits against me. But so we're trying to climb over our aversion and impatience and negativity to get to some sort of idealized loving me on the other side. So again, what Ajahn Sumedho would emphasize, and I feel it's so helpful, he says, rather than trying to climb over your aversion to get to the place where this idealized me loves all beings equally, then instead have loving kindness for your resentment, your aversion, your impatience, and that feeling of intolerance, like, I can't stand it, why me, this isn't fair. That's what this feeling is. Here it is. So it's having an acceptance of that presently arisen state. And from that acceptance, then we are able to find more of a genuine tolerance, a genuine kindness, a genuine, say, forgiveness and spacious attitude towards the other beings, and towards those painful, difficult, challenging states. So that brings me on to the compassion. So Karuna, as people know, is very frequently, most frequently translated as compassion. But there's, I would say, a bit of a problem with the word compassion, because the etymology of it is compassio, from the Latin, to suffer with. So the passion, passio, is to suffer. Like the passion of Christ is not Christ being excited or charged up, but it's the suffering of Christ. The passion of Christ is suffering. So compassio is to suffer with. But as I was mentioning, Karuna, like the other Brahma viharas, is a great brightness. It's not a state of suffering. And so that it's helpful to recognize, there needs to be a bit of rejigging of how in the Western world how we relate to compassion, and to see from a Buddhist perspective, there's different ways of relating to that. So we would say the Buddha had ocean-like compassion, infinite compassion for other beings, but he wasn't suffering on account of the suffering of other beings. So, and that's something that's very hard for us in the Western world to get our minds around. I often mention how this was, for me growing up as a child, this was a big issue. I was very tearful as a child. I come across as a very sort of chirpy, positive character, but I was very tearful as a child. I shed many tears. And a lot because of the suffering of other beings and not being able to do enough to help. And I would really feel for the suffering of others. My mother told me the story of in way back in the past, the early 60s, and myself and my two sisters, I have two older sisters, were gathered around our little black and white television, and we were watching Heidi. And so my sisters there apparently sort of glued to the screen with smiles and fascination, and I was sitting there with tears pouring down my face. And my mother thought, funny boy. But that was how I felt. I wasn't allowed to watch Bambi. So it's like, no, I would not be, they knew I would be a wreck for weeks and weeks. So that's true. I wasn't allowed to watch Bambi. And there was a record that was a pop song that was a hit called A Little Dog Cried. I wasn't allowed to listen to that either, because they knew I'd be impossible to live with. I'd just be a pool of tears for weeks and weeks. So anyway, not to over egg the pudding, as they say, but so it was a strong feeling for me, and part of my entry into monastic life and spiritual training is how can you help more beings? How can you cultivate this quality of compassion and be of benefit to relieve the sufferings of beings in a better way? And I often tell this story, but it was a real significant turning point, because I hadn't come to a conclusion about how you could possibly help all beings, or that you wouldn't be suffering on account of the suffering of others, because I really felt that very strongly. And one day when I was a novice monk in Thailand, and the mealtime there, they have one meal a day. It's at 8:30 in the morning, and then things are pretty much tidied up, and everyone's gone back to their huts in the forest by about 10. For some reason I was in the main hall just sort of tidying up, or just around and about. I was the only person there. And this man came to visit, and unusually he spoke some English, which was rare for that northeast part of Thailand. Very, very few people spoke English. And I was the only monastic around, so we started to talk. And we got chatting, and in this conversation, the subject of compassion came up, and I made this comment about how I felt so strongly and suffered a lot because of the suffering of other beings, and was trying to use my life in a beneficial way. And he kind of looked at me, gave me this sort of quizzical look, like, strange. And he said, well, because one of the things I was saying is I can never do enough. I never feel like there's more I should be able to do, I could do. And if other beings continue to suffer, it's because I haven't done enough. I should have done more, I could have done more. And so then their suffering is my fault. Maybe that's familiar to some of you, that kind of attitude. And so he looked at me and said, well, I trust that I'm a good-hearted person, and I do what I can to help others, and I know that if I could do more, I would do more, but I also know what my capacity is. And so, so if I create suffering in myself about what I can't do for others, then you've got two suffering beings instead of one. So that doesn't help. I thought, I was like left there catching flies, as they say. Wow, that thought had never crossed my mind. And he said, I know, I know I'm not selfish or lazy. I would do more if I could, but there's only so much that one human being can do. And so I don't create suffering about the things I can't do. And if a time comes when I can do more, yes, of course I'll do more. But I don't create suffering about what I haven't been able to do. And that was almost like hearing a loud click, like, wow, that is such a different perspective. And also how he trusted his own capacity, his own good heart, and that he didn't look down or criticize himself because he didn't have infinite capacity to relieve the suffering of all beings. So I feel that in terms of translating karuna, some way of rendering it more like as empathy or sympathy. Again, it's not perfect. Pathos in Greek means suffering, so it's not ideal. But that sense of attuning to the suffering of others, but not creating suffering within oneself on account of that. You can't just decide to think that way, but I feel in terms of guiding our efforts in meditation and practice, that we're not trying to suffer on account of other beings, but rather to say cultivate that quality of empathy, of attunement, of acknowledging, receiving the difficulty of others, and then being open to respond in whatever way is effective to help, where help can be given. So one of the aspects then of cultivating or consciously developing loving kindness, compassion in these various ways, whether it's through methods and skillful means of the southern Buddhist world or the northern Buddhist world, one of the tricky aspects is me sending loving kindness to you, or me having compassion for you, or you having compassion for me, or loving kindness. That in the way that things get languaged, there can be a cementing, a reifying of self-view. There's a me here, there's a you there. I've got some loving kindness, I want to send it to you to be a benefit to you. So, and people often wonder about that, say, well, how does this work with the teachings on not self, Ajahn? If it's may all beings be happy, or I want to have compassion for these beings. But I feel it's also good to consider the Buddha's pedagogical method. So there's many places, again I'm much more familiar with the Pali mode, but there's many places where the Buddha starts, or the practice he lays out is really based on self-view. Like, I am of the nature to age, I am of the nature to sicken, I am of the nature to die. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become separated from me. There's a lot of me in that. A lot of, this is mine, these my things. Yeah, this is my watch. At the moment, I lost the previous one. But so this is mine. So all that is mine. So it starts off from self-view, from our ordinary mental habits. And so within loving kindness and compassion, sabbe satta sukhita hontu, may all beings be happy. Ahang sukhita homi, may I be happy. So that's our ordinary everyday understanding. Yeah, I am a person, this is my body, this is my personality, I am an individual, and that's the relative fact. So you start off from where we are, but then as the practice sort of develops and strengthens, then the quality of wisdom also becomes stronger, and so then that the way that the mind takes that initial direction then is say transformed or is modified, and is slowly and steadily freed from self-view. So as long as the practice of loving kindness or compassion is based on self-view, then there's always going to be dukkha, dissatisfaction, as part of the result. Again, as Ajahn Sumedho would put it, if you start off with ignorance, if you start off with self-view, the result has to be dukkha. There's always going to be dissatisfaction. If you start off with vijja, with awareness, then the result is peacefulness, is liberation, is nibbana. So in these kind of practices, it's helpful to not be taking those the sense of I and other, me and you, in a sort of concrete way, but realizing these are figures of speech. These are convenient vocal conventions that we use in order for communication. And in the teachings, someone challenges the Buddha on this and says, so if all dhammas are not self, if everything is anatta, then what's with all the pronouns? You say, she, he, we, you, they. Who are these beings that are being referred to? And you can almost hear the Buddha sighing. So these are conventions that the Tathagata uses for the means of communication, for conveying principles for the sake of aiding liberation. They're not taken to be permanent, independent entities, and so it's like so that if we are able to shift the view from practice based on self-view to practice based on Dhamma, based on nature, then there's a ripening, a strengthening, that those qualities are able to be more, say, practically and completely so brought to fulfillment, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, serenity. So what I mean in this is there's a very long Pali word, Dhammanu Dhamma Patipada, practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. And so that means rather than me practicing loving kindness or me practicing compassion or me concentrating my mind or me developing wisdom or me making the effort to save all beings, then there's a recognition that that's a figure of speech, it's a convenient fiction, and that rather than I will generate loving kindness towards you, there can be the recognition of that the presence of loving kindness in the world is something that brings blessings, brings contentment, happiness, good fortune. So guided by mindfulness and wisdom, let loving kindness arise, or let compassion arise. So it's not woven together with a sense of I and me and mine, but rather mindfulness and wisdom is the guiding and energizing force in the mixture. So that in terms of the Eightfold Path, then the Samma Sankappo, right resolution or wise resolution, wise intention, it's not like I am intending to cultivate the good, I am intending to let go of the harmful, but rather if it's Samma Sankappo, then that's an intentional resolution, aspiration that's completely free of self-view, free of conceit, and is motivated by mindfulness and wisdom, by the attunement of the heart to the present reality. Similarly, Samma Vayamo, wise effort or right effort, that effort is not me doing something to get rid of the unwholesome, or doing something to cultivate the wholesome and keep it, but rather that Samma Vayamo, that right effort, that wise effort, is guided by mindfulness and wisdom. So it's not me trying to do something to get some result for me, but rather those qualities are cultivated, they're generated, but free of self-view, free of conceit. Or maybe as a final example, with respect to this, and it's a title of one of the Brahma Vihara booklets, is taken from this. There was a student of ours in the States, a man called Barry Kapke. His Pali name was Kandanya, and he ran a Buddhist therapy, body therapy studio and so clinic in San Francisco area. And he had three principles that he would use to teach his students, and I feel extremely skillful in this respect. And it represents a sense of setting direction, an effort being made free of self-view, free of conceit. So the three principles are: don't push, just use the weight of your own body. So it was like he was a massage school and a bodywork school as well as in a major part of his sort of therapeutic methods. Don't push, just use the weight of your own body. Don't diagnose, just be aware. Don't try to help, but don't turn away. And so that there's effort being made, direction is being set, but not me trying to get you to be a certain way, or me trying to fix you, or me trying to explain how things are. So and in that little booklet, again, shameless self-promotion, if you want to help yourself to a copy, they are there. But I do feel these are skillful ways of describing how both compassion, also loving kindness, can be actualized in our lives and employed without me trying to do something to save you, or me being responsible for making you happy, or me practicing metta so I will be of benefit to others, to not be creating that kind of rigid, fixed framework, but rather to see that direction can be set, effort can be made, but when that comes from an attunement to the time, the place, the situation, when it's guided by mindfulness and wisdom rather than by me doing some practice to get a result for you, then the best result, or the most beneficial result, is what comes into being. So Kandanya passed away from bowel cancer. I was with him when he died in a hospice in San Francisco. He was fairly young. He was in his 50s when he passed away. And one of his students, she couldn't be at the funeral, but she sent this very beautiful letter that was read out at Kondanya's funeral, which we had at the monastery. And she said she described these three principles, and she said, so my younger sister was pregnant and was going to give birth. So I went to all these midwifery classes and trained myself to be a kind of a birth helper, a doula. And so I was really keyed up and ready to help my little sister have her baby. But then when she's actually giving, some months later, when she's actually giving birth, she was in incredible pain. And she was screaming with agony and didn't want anyone near her, didn't want anyone to touch her. And so we were a bit stuck, not knowing what to do, and she's in this howls of agony. And so suddenly I remembered Kondanya's advice and his principles. So instead of trying to comfort her or go and sort of help her by moving her around, she said, I just went and sat at the end of her bed and just was present. And she said how that after her little sister had given birth, her sister said to her, that was so helpful, that was amazing. Just you didn't try to make me feel all right, that was not possible, but you were there, and it made such a big difference, and that it was something that was extraordinarily helpful in that birthing process. And again, this same woman has said that she had learned that from Kondanya. One really good example was when she was on a 10-day retreat, and in a completely miserable state, sort of sniffling into her porridge in the morning, the retreat center, shrine, kitchen, dining room. And she said, Kondanya was also on the retreat. He came and sat down next to her, didn't sort of look at her or even say any words. He just put his breakfast down and just sat next to her and ate his breakfast. He said, that was so helpful. He didn't try to fix me, he didn't try to explain anything, he didn't try to make me feel all right, but he was there, he was present. And so that's a little example of how this kind of compassionate principles can be extremely effective and impactful, but coming from that attunement to the time, the place, the situation, when the heart lets go of greed, hatred, delusion, is attuned to the time, the place, the situation, then what arises is appropriate compassionate activity. So I see it's now 8:50, speaking of appropriate times, so I'll draw things to a close there and open up the floor for any questions that there might be. So please don't be shy. Anything? Yes, there's a hand.
Is it fair to say that not all suffering is necessarily a bad thing? I mean, if you make a mistake and you suffer as a consequence of that mistake, provided you learn from it, it can be instructive, suffering.
The word providing is doing a lot of work there. There's some heavy lifting going on. If we can, say, then every experience, pleasant, painful and neutral, will be something that teaches us, and it will be a blessing. If we've made a mistake and then we feel regret, it doesn't have to be a cause of guilt or self-hatred. If we've done something that was unkind or dishonest, and then we feel painful emotion on account of that, in Buddhist psychology, that's a very wholesome kind of pain. That's useful pain. Just like physical pain protects the body, that pain of if you tell a lie to someone deliberately, and you feel, oh, that was not beautiful. That painfulness of remembering it is useful. And in Buddhist psychology, the more spiritually developed the heart is, the stronger that pain will be. So that and it becomes to the point where when the Buddha is speaking about arahants, he said it's actually physically impossible for an arahant to deliberately take life, or they can't tell a lie. The tongue will not form the words of a lie. It can't do it. So it's like it's so that obstruction is so strong. You know, the mind, the heart can't go against it. So we very easily turn those feelings of regret or self-criticism or pain into self-hatred and guilt, but in and of themselves, if they're freed from self-view, it's like that was done. You know, that selfish action was taken. That lie was told. That's the cause. Here's the effect. Ow. Then, if it's just left at that with no commentary or self-creation around it, then that's a powerful and direct teaching. But it does take that, provided that there is a skillful attitude and that there is that readiness to learn. So even painful illnesses, debilities, where we're losing our faculties, our hearing, our memory, our mobility, our vision, so on and so forth, that we wouldn't choose those or we wouldn't ask for them, but there can be that same kind of readiness to learn from those physical pains as well as the emotional pains. Yes, at the back there.
Thank you. I once, after doing some metta for quite a bit, I once had quite a drop and felt quite low and a bit depressed. And I thought, well, you know, stuff happens in meditation. But then I read somewhere the idea that could be related to metta. I can't remember where I read it, and it might be rubbish. So I just wonder if it's rubbish or if it's a thing.
It depends how one has been practicing metta. You know, if it's a sort of overlay of sentiment, like trying to think positively about everything, and then just not being able to carry that on, then there will be a shadow to that. If it's, I would say, if it's the genuine Brahma vihara, the actual embodiment of that brightness of heart, then it's not going to have that kind of drop effect or a depression or a particular sadness. But it so much hinges around the attitude that we have. If it's been a genuine quality of metta, then I say that wouldn't be I would be surprised if that was a result. Very surprised. It's not miraculous, but you know, that the quality of metta, the positive aspects will stay with us for quite some time. Yeah, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for a lovely talk. You made a point about acceptance of a state that arises from something that's happened or impatience or whatever. Just wondered what your thoughts were linking that to forgiveness. Somebody has done something, and how you should go about forgiving and with all of those things that you said in mind.
Yeah, so it's very closely related. The word "give" in forgiveness is not an accident. It's a giving. So you're giving space for people to be imperfect, and that you're not pretending that you like what someone has done, but also that in a way it's both connected to karuna and metta, because sometimes we judge others as if they were supposed to be perfectly enlightened arahants, and then when they're a bit selfish or a bit cruel or a bit lazy or they're more focused on their own list of things to do than about you, then how could they be that way? That's impossible. You know, or sometimes not to be too cynical, but you know, reading in the news about a corrupt politician. Like, oh, what a surprise! So it's not, you're not glad that people are corrupt, but it's in a way we shouldn't be surprised. And one of the interesting things is that in terms of Buddhist psychology, at least in the Pali scriptures, sanity comes with arahantship. So unless you've arrived at arahantship, you're not quite sane. So, and not to belittle the difficulties of mental illness and such like, But if we think of ourselves as being on the psych ward, and these are our fellow patients, the other inmates of our ward, our sanatorium, then we can be a bit more forgiving. We can make space for each other. That we're not expecting people to have a sort of idealized, super perfect standards of behavior, but they are, of course, they're flawed. If they're guided by greed, hatred, and delusion, as well as by kindness and compassion and generosity, then there's going to be selfish times. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to do things that are upsetting. Why should we be surprised? So, in looking at the way that we hold others and giving them more space, giving them space to be imperfect, then forgiveness is a natural result of that. So, in our customs, we have a ceremony of asking for forgiveness that is carried out several times in the year, particularly at the end of a retreat time together, or paying respects to somebody on a special day, like a birthday. The centerpiece is asking for forgiveness, and you say, whatever has been done by body, speech, or mind, intentionally or unintentionally, that's been hurtful to you, I ask for your forgiveness. And then the person who's being addressed, their formalized response is, I forgive you and please forgive me too. Ahang kamami tumhehi bhime kamitabang. So even if it's a very high-ranking person or someone with a reputation of being fully enlightened, they'll still say, please forgive me too. The Buddha could still annoy people. Yeah, he did. There's many instances in the Pali Canon, at least, where the things that the Buddha said upset people. Like the very first discourse in the middle-length sayings, the Majjhima Nikaya, at the end of that, Sutta number 1, it's like, those monks did not delight in the Blessed One's words. And Sutta number 1, they open the Majjhima Nikaya with the monks not approving of the Buddha's words. I don't like it. Don't like it. So I think that's a very interesting editorial choice. But it's also the Buddha wouldn't resent that, but recognizing, there's some negativity there. So maybe that'll change. Maybe it won't. So that the Buddha would sometimes say things that he didn't deliberately hurt people's feelings, but sometimes things that he said did upset people or kind of cause offense or pain. So that I feel it's a very beautiful part of that tradition, that the elder or the senior person says, I forgive you, please forgive me too. So it's a way of wiping the slate clean. And also it's kind of interesting as an aside, sometimes when you're carrying out that ceremony, there's something that goes, I don't forgive. I'm going to hang on to that one. And they say, that's there's something there. So at least the ceremony has highlighted that I'll forgive you for everything except that. And so, okay, there's a stone in the shoe there. There's something that's being held on to. So I see the clock has gone round to 9. I'm not sure what time we're supposed to finish.
Thank you so much. Well, I hope the building work and everything goes well in the party. And this Sumedho is also his big birthday for. So, many of us have been thinking about him and his contribution, to Buddhism in the UK. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes, well, my pleasure. I said these books are all for free distribution, so greed doesn't count. You can take as many as you like. Doesn't count as greed in these situations, so please help yourself to anything that looks interesting. As I said, some have been, the Brahma Vihara ones have been there for about 4 or 5 years, 5 or 6 years, but the other ones are just fresh from the presses.